Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Variable Play Network. I am Javi. It is November 14th. It is Sunday, which means it is time for some Sunday night magic. Thank you for everyone who is joining me this evening or is watching this maybe the following night on YouTube, on our Facebook page, even on Twitch, if you might be on Twitch. So, again, hi, everyone. I'm Javi. So, tonight's episode of Sunday Night Magic is going to be pretty much just a little bit more of additional content for the new upcoming set, or actually just the recently launched set of Magic the Gathering, which is known as Innistrad Crimson Vow. So today we're going to be going through a list of cards that I feel have significant impact or will be viable cards for the format of EDH or Commander. So I have about 33, 34 selection. I know it's kind of long, but actually from Midnight Hunt, I think we went over 40 to 45 cards. So Crimson Vow is actually looking a little weak, and I think you're gonna notice that from the cards that I'm gonna be showing today. So this is actually already a combination of potential commander options as well as just cards that you may want to be running in your commander decks. So I'll try to go through the comments as the episode goes through. And in the interest of time, I will be referencing several other cards that you may not be familiar with. I encourage you to look it up if you are interested. Again, Commander really spans through every set that Magic has ever put out. So you're talking close to 30 odd years of cards from multiple sets. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, um, yeah, pretty much this is adding in close to about 300 new cards. So we're looking at maybe 10% of the set, which I would consider EDH viable. So join me. Again, these are my opinions. If you this is not set in stone. If you feel that I missed a card, by all means, please comment below. Share with anyone else that might be catching up with the video as we're doing it live, or even if you're watching the recording the following day. I do have a playlist of all of the Sunday Night Magic episodes available in our Facebook page. I will be creating one for our YouTube page soon, so you can maybe catch up with all 22 episodes now of Sunday Night Magic. And with that, let's get started. So I want to go ahead and begin with the white cards. And there isn't a lot. So very first one that caught my attention when the preview season started is the Welcoming Vampire. And, how fitting that this would be the first card that I am going to be previewing today. So, the Welcoming Vampire is a 3 to cast 2/3 flyer, which is pretty decent stats, especially for white. And what this does is whenever one or more other creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield under your control. So, it doesn't matter where the creature comes from if your opponent gives it to you. Let's say they're using a Forbidden Orchard, or even if you're using like a Tender Shoot Dryad that creates a 1/1 Saproling every turn. As long as it's power 2 or less and it enters the battlefield in your control, you get to draw a card. Unfortunately, this only triggers once each turn. So if you have an effect like Tender Shoot Dryad that creates a 1/1 during every player's turn, you could potentially be drawing 4 cards a turn, but that would put you in the colors of green and white. You don't really need to be running a vampire tribal for this particular creature. It just so happens to be a vampire. But this is, I think, a much better version of an older card, which was Mentor of the Meek. That when a creature would come in, you'd have to pay 2 colorless to draw a card. But you can do it as many times as long as you're able to pay. This one is free, but you are limited to 1 draw per turn. White really needs draw, and unfortunately, it does have the once per turn clause, which is some of the dumbest wording that I've ever seen in Magic cards. But I know that Wizard of the Coast is intentionally powering down their cards just to avoid infinite loops or just, overblown or overpriced cards. So it's as balanced as you can get it, I suppose. And it is white, it is draw engine. All you have to do is just play small creatures, and at least you get 1 card back, which is not bad. if you have a way of producing at least one creature every turn, even outside of your turn during your opponent's turns, like some kind of token creator, you could be netting more cards. So definitely worth mentioning and adding to the list. Welcoming Vampire. Hey, first comment. Hey, Mikey. Yes, you know what? A lot of people didn't really notice this when the previous season started, but it was one of the first cards that caught my attention because just anything white that provides draw is something that people desperately need. So there is this to look forward to. Now, the next white card, and actually the only other white card on my list out of 34 cards, so that should really be saying a lot. Wizard, Wizards of the Coast make some terrible decisions when they design white. The color pie needs to be fixed. But you know what? One more choice to go into the game. This is Cemetery Protector. Cemetery Protector is a 4 to cast, and it has 2 white, so it's a little tough on like splashing different colors to it, but it is a 4 to cast 3/4, which you can play at instant speed. Not bad. Human Soldier, and when Cemetery Protector enters the battlefield, you get to exile a card from a graveyard, which means you can target your opponents. So this is actually a really good graveyard answer. And then, whenever you play a land or cast a spell, if it shares a type with the exiled card, you get 1/1 human tokens. So if you take away a creature from your opponent, and every time you cast a creature spell, you basically make 1/1 human creatures, which could actually even work with the Welcoming Vampire. That if you are casting, let's say you take away an instant, okay, and during your opponent's turn you cast an instant, you get a 1/1, the Welcoming Vampire will let you draw. So you can technically kind of work these cards together out of turn. And this is actually pretty decent. A 4 to cast 3/4 flash with a little bit of graveyard hate, and potentially something that can make you a couple of little 1/1s that, you can use as blockers, sacrificial fodder, or anything else that you might be working in. So surprisingly, as a human soldier, it works really well with the aristocrat build that you can create more 1/1s and just feed them to the machine and try to run your combo. But as far as the 2 cards go, Welcoming Vampire is definitely the better option. And that's pretty much it for white. Everything else that I saw from white in the spoiler lists are there are some options that you might want to consider if you're going tribal, but maybe spirit tribal, which I'll kind of touch on a little bit later. But there's just not that many good white cards for commander at this time. Crimson Vow is really a vampire set, so I was primarily focusing on looking for maybe black, red, or blue cards. So surprisingly, that really is what came out. A large number of it is blue, as you will see later on, because the next color is going to be blue, and I got a lot of cards to pretty much discuss. And we got a second comment here. Hi, Anna. Thank you for joining. I hope that you find any of the material or cards that are featured today interesting. It might get you to start playing Commander. All right, so we move on to blue. First one that I'm going to be talking about here is Inspired Idea. This doesn't really look like an amazing card. It's 3 to cast, draw 3 cards, and that's it. Okay? Now you can pay 5 for the cleave cost on the card. So this is a new mechanic for the set that specifically removes the words that are in brackets. So basically, if you cast this as Inspired Idea on its own, draw 3 cards, your maximum hand size is reduced by 3 for the rest of the game. So your maximum hand size is left at 4. Or you can pay 5 and pretty much just draw 3 cards flat out. It depends how you're going to do this. On the turn that you might be winning the game, or if you're running with a lot of like spell discounts like Barrel, Chief of Compliance, 3 to cast, draw 3 cards is pretty decent. So I would still run this, even if you're going to lose your maximum hand size. Something as simple as a Reliquary Tower, something as simple as a Thought Vessel, or even a spell book answers this. That there are so many material that you can use to manipulate your hand size limit that the whole second half of this card that you have to cleave off doesn't really matter. 3 to cast, draw 3 is decent. Sorcery speed is what kind of makes this a little crappy, but to be honest, I'd still run this in any mono blue deck. And the fact that it only has one blue in its casting cost means that you could probably splash this onto any other deck that just produces high amounts of mana. So, something for you to consider. Inspired idea. Next one is actually one of my favorite picks from the set because it really is something that players did not take into consideration. This is a surprise card. I can see the value of this card kind of shooting up. It is a 1 blue to cast instant. It says counter target spell that wasn't cast from its owner's hand. You can pay the cleave cost of 3 and just counter target spell. Okay, maybe in the late game you'd want to play 3, but you know what this is really good for? You know what spell doesn't come from a player's hand? They're commanders. This is a 1 blue to cast counter commander spell. It doesn't even care about spell types. So I definitely want this in foil and multiple copies of it if I can. This is an amazing early game defense against a commander that you can pretty much just stop them from advancing their board state for a single blue. This is equivalent to like a red elemental blast or an REB, hydroblast, swords to plowshare that the commander comes into play and then you're gonna exile it. So this is pretty good. Later in the game, you might pay 3 because you need to actually counter a spell that was from their hand. Sure. So this here, I think, is a little bit of a hidden gem from the set that people may not necessarily see its value, especially in standard. I mean, this doesn't fit in with the meta, except that there are a lot of exile and play effects. I mean, I run Prosper from AFR, and there are a couple of new effects like Florian, and I believe that there is one more that will be going through later on in the red cards that also let you play from exile. So sure, Wash Away can help for that. But strictly just countering a commander for 1 blue is so efficient that I had to put it on the list. Moving on to my next recommendation from blue, we are looking at Hullbreaker Horror. So this one is really odd. I don't really see people running this. There is another big blue creature that came out in other sets that you might want to consider adding this in. This is pretty much a reprinting or reimagining of another card called the Tidespout Tyrant. Okay, this one is 7 to cast. It is 7/8, so it's expensive, it's huge, but it has flash and it cannot be countered. And then pretty much whenever you cast a spell, you get to choose one of the following. Return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, which means you get to manipulate the stack. You cast a spell and then they try to counter it. All you have to do is play one more spell and you can send that counter spell back to their hand and force them to try paying for it again. Or you can even return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So you can bounce your own permanents. So this is the whole tide spout that if you have 2 mana positive rocks, let's say you have, for example, a Mox Opal and maybe a Soul Ring, or maybe Mana Crypt and a Soul Ring. So basically, you will go infinite. When you cast one, you bounce the other and float in response, cast and float, cast and float. So this is pretty much Tide Spout Tyrant, but it cannot be countered and it is instant speed. So you can do this in response to things. If you have a way of maybe cheating this guy in using polymorph effects, reanimation, just sneak him into the game. This thing is pretty much a powerhouse at 7/8. So it looks way too high in converted mana cost. This is going to be brutal in ad nauseum decks. So I wouldn't really run it in those particular types of decks. But if you are using a whole Tide Spout combo, like in the creatureless Urza builds that exist in competitive ETH, this is actually an alternative that you might want to consider for Tidespout Tyrant because it's uncounterable. All right, so we move on to the next card. The next is Consuming Tide. Consuming Tide is a sorcery that costs 4. Each player chooses a non-land permanent they control. They return everything else that are non-land permanents to their hands. That includes you as well. Then you draw a card for each opponent who has more cards in their hand than you. So you could potentially draw 3 cards at the most for this, or even if you're playing massive commander tables, but the typical pod would be 4 players. So you could be drawing at least 3 cards and you've sort of forced a full reset. If you're behind on permanents, have no creatures or anything like that, you can use this to save yourself and draw 3 cards, which is not bad for 4. So sorcery speed is the only thing that probably makes this card a little weaker than it should be. But you know what? If you're running on a budget and if you don't really like Cyclonic Rift, if you don't like using Devastation Tide, the Miracle version, this is still something to consider because it is a mass bounce and you do get to draw cards. Potentially, maybe, let's say if you're at an extreme advantage and draw nothing, you shouldn't have played this in the first place anyway. So the conditions for when to use this is pretty clear. Consuming Tide makes it into the list and something I would definitely recommend other players look into. All right, so let's see. Okay, wait. I think a card was just missed here. Oh, here. Let's go to the next one. So the next one is Patchwork Crawler. So Patchwork Crawler is a 2 to cast zombie horror. It is a 1/2 that has a couple of abilities tied onto it. First one is that you can pay 3, exile target creature card from your graveyard, and Patchwork Crawler gets a +1/+1 counter. Fine, it gets bigger. But more importantly, Patchwork Crawler has all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled this way. So, this is actually a cheaper, because of its casting cost, but worse version of Necrotic Ooze. Necrotic Ooze is a 4 to cast black creature that just has all activated abilities of creatures in your graveyard. So, this one is slower because you have to exile them, but technically, even if somebody takes away your graveyard, as long as you've already exiled the creatures with Patchwork Crawler, it retains the abilities. So it has some things going right for it, and then also it's pretty much slow. So this is what I was talking about, that they are making a little bit of underpowered cards in these sets. That there are a couple of hurdles that you have to get through just to get the same ability that an older card could produce. The only thing that makes this viable too and something to consider is that technically this is like a second Necrotic Ooze that you could be running. And then it is blue. So it is like a different color combination that you might want to consider. Because the combo for Necrotic Ooze only uses 2 artifact creatures. So you don't even necessarily need any color, which means that Patchwork Crawler here can run the same combo of Necrotic Ooze of those 2 artifact creatures. I believe it is the Soul Devi Devourer and either Walking Ballista or Triskelion, which are all artifact creatures. So it actually introduces the combo into a different color. Something to consider, but again, much slower than the original combo. Let's move on to the next card. So the next one here is Spectral Arcanist. So this one is for the cast. It is also not really from the main set. This is from the commander sets, so the pre-constructed decks. The blue-white spirit deck introduces this. It is a 4 to cast 3/2 flying. When Spectral Arcanist enters the battlefield, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value equal to less or equal to the number of spirits you control from a graveyard, which means you can target your opponent, and then you don't pay for the cost, and whatever you cast gets exiled. On its own, it is a 4 to cast 3/2 flyer. When it comes in, you basically get to steal any 1 to cast spell from your opponent's graveyards. You can take away or pretty much get a free copy of any tutor. If you happen to just have 1 or more, there's maybe 2, 3, or 4 other spirits in play, if you are like running a little bit of a spirit tribal, if you have changelings or anything like that, you basically get a larger casting cost spell. But to be honest, in CEDH, everything is maybe 3 or less. And on its own here, Spectral Arcanist might be able to pretty much steal a removal spell, steal a shooter, or any basic one to cast spells that you might find your opponents using. So that's pretty good. It's not flash, so it can't be used as counter protection, but still getting a free spell out of a 4 to cast 3/2 is pretty decent. And it's only one blue, so you can splash different colors onto it. So it's something to be considered. Next one here is Occult Epiphany. Epiphany. There you go. Pronounce that wrong. So it's one blue and X. It's an instant. And it says draw X cards, then discard X cards. That's pretty good for an instant. There is another version of this card that costs 2 blue and X. So this is cheaper. And what's more is that after discarding your X cards, you get a 1/1 white spirit creature token for each card type you discarded this way. So in an infinite mana situation, you might be able to produce 7 or 8 spirits, but that's not necessarily the whole point of here. You get to dig for cards. So even at the end of an opponent's turn, let's say I use Occult Epiphany for 3. So that's 1 blue and 2 X. Fine, draw 2, discard 2. If I just throw away a land and a creature, I still get 2 1/1s. So the value is there. It's a good way of digging for cards, giving you a couple of blockers, because this is instant speed, so you can even do it during your opponent's turn. And you still technically, okay, you blew one card away, which is this Epiphany, and then you get whatever you replace it for, and then some creatures. Not bad. And again, these are spirits, so this does kind of fit in again with the whole spirit tribal that they are pushing for. And yes, this is from the Crimson Vow commander deck, but these are also available in the set booster, so you might be able to find a copy of it. Now, moving on to our last blue recommendation. So, as you can see, I really did find a lot of blue cards interesting that I wanted to go over. This one I think is actually pretty viable as either a commander or even just a card inside of your deck. So, we have Jacob Hawkins Inspector. He's a 2 to cast 0/2 human advisor. So 2 to cast 0/2 is reminiscent of the Jace that flipped over, Vryn Prodigy. So this guy says that you tap him and draw a card, then exile a card from your hand face down. You can look at that card as long as it remains exiled, and then you may pay 6, that's 4 colorless and 2 blue, and pretty much you get to flip Jacob Hawkins, which means that you can kind of take your time and accumulate cards with him if you want. And then when you flip him over, he becomes Hawkins Insight. It's a legendary enchantment that at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library face down. You can look at it anytime. And then once during each of your turns, you may play a land or cast a spell from among the cards exiled without paying its cost. So your commander becomes a legendary enchantment. Then all of a sudden, you get 1 free spell every turn based on the cards that it's taking away. Nothing like just a little bit of library manipulation. Just set up the top card as you want it to be, and you might be able to cast it for free. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to exile the card. And then during each of your turns, so technically you can even do this post combat or any way that you want to manipulate this, but just once per turn, you get a free spell from what was exiled by Hawkins Insight, or even from Jacob Hawkins. So this has potential. Free spells are always free spells. Hawkins himself, as a 0/2, can easily be taken out, and he doesn't really pose a threat. And the legendary enchantment, if it ever gets broken, send him back to the command zone, which is not that bad. The flip for 6 is a little expensive. It's a little late game, but you know what? Blue has so much acceleration, high tide effects, mana rocks, and untap and tap abilities that might be able to produce you a lot of mana that you need. So I don't see why this wouldn't be a viable option. So Jacob Hawkins makes it into my list of just top recommendations from Crimson Vow that you should consider running in blue. Let's move on to black. Very first one is Dying to Serve. This one here is a little bit of a personal pick of mine because I like discard effects, especially self discarding. But so here, whenever you discard one or more cards, create a tap 2/2 black zombie. No decay this time, just a normal 2/2 zombie. And then this only triggers once each turn. So it's not that great. But, let's say that you have like a Anvil of Bogardan effect that, or if you are kind of running a little bit of like an Anj Falcon Wrath that you are discarding every turn, it doesn't even care what kind of card you discarded. As long as you're discarding one card, you pretty much get a 2/2 zombie that's tapped. So you might be able to accumulate an army in the long run. Not the best card since it's limited to once per turn, but I just wanted to throw this in there. Next one is Camber the Plunderer. So this one is again from the Commander pre-constructed decks. This is from the Black-Red Vampire deck, and it actually is partnered with another card called Loreen the Diversion. I don't think Loreen is even worth mentioning, but Camber is actually pretty decent. Camber is a vampire rogue and is a 4 to cast 3/4. It has lifelink, so you can use this vampire to gain life. And more importantly, whenever a creature dies, doesn't care if it's a token or what kind of creature, okay, even if it is your own or your opponent's creatures, it just says whenever a creature dies, gain one life and create a blood token. Just to give you an idea of what a blood token is, let me just jump a little bit ahead here. And this is a blood token. It is an artifact, and it says that you pay one, tap it, and discard a card, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. So basically, it gives you the option of pretty much discarding a card to draw a brand new card, which is pretty good in terms of filtering. If you are trying to dig through your library for cards, that's not bad. But so Camber is actually really good because when a creature dies, it doesn't care if it's yours or your opponent's. In a 4-player game, there might be a lot of death, or even when someone decides to do some kind of sacrifice loop, you're gaining life and creating blood tokens. You can kind of run this with different engines. I see a lot of possible infinite loops running with this guy if you have some kind of recursion effect, which black really does with grave crawlers, a single zombie, and maybe a pyrection altar. You keep sacrificing the same creature, you'll gain infinite life and infinite blood tokens. Now, that's not going to do anything to kill your opponent just yet. You can add in a couple of more other cards and probably come up with something very, very dangerous with this. So I definitely want a copy of Camber just for my own deck brewing purposes. And I think that a lot of people should consider running him. If you are using a Villis or any of like Crick builds that are, paying so much life, a mono black, I think throwing Camber in might be able to help you recover some life. Next one is Talksrail, the Corrosive. So this one is the large 7 to cast creature from the black side. So we looked at the blue one earlier. So Talksrail is a slug horror, 7 to cast 7/7, legendary, which means it can be your commander. At the beginning of your end step, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. So every creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. You can kill waves of little 1/1s with this thing, or even just begin to whittle down the power and toughness of your opponent's creatures. And then whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter dies, you get a 1/1 slug. So everything that dies from your opponent's side, as long as it had slime on it, you get a 1/1. Not bad. And then pretty much blue and black, which means that Talksrail is actually a blue and black commander. Sacrifice a slug, draw a card. This is actually really good. If it wasn't just for the absurd mana cost of 7, I think that Talksrail would be a very, very highly sought after piece for commander decks. But, you know, I think at this time, having him as like something secondary into your builds and like maybe surprise animating him would be something that you'd want to consider. So I see a lot of potential here, especially in maybe casual play. This is brutal. Next, we are looking at Demonic Bargain. This one is another dangerous card that I actually added it into this list specifically because I think that it's kind of suicidal in a way, but there is a you can capitalize on that. So Demonic Bargain is 3 to cast, exile the top 13 cards of your library, then search your library for a card and put it in your hand. Why would you exile 13 cards from your library? You might lose important pieces. Sure. But if you are running decks that you are just really specifically digging for a certain card, this is almost as close to demonic consultation. You won't be able to remove your entire library. But, you know, late game, if you're really desperate, and let's say you only have like 10 cards or something like that, you can technically run this with Thassa's Oracle and still find a way to win. And then it even has a tutor effect if it's just very early in the game. Um, if you are already holding the pieces that you need and don't necessarily care about the rest of your library, this will work out pretty well too. If you're just looking, let's say, for counter protection, that if you are moving towards the end of the game, this might be just, you know, a little bit of assistance. I mean, black has so many tutors, and this is just one more good option, I think. So something to consider. Profane Tutor didn't make it that well because of suspend and its speed. This one doesn't have any suspend slowness to it. And the Exile top 13, I think people are just kind of too worried about losing cards. We're talking about 100. If you have redundancy or if you have multiple lines of victory, what's 13 cards really? So I put it on this list because I think people should still consider using it. Right, next is Doomweaver. This one comes from the commander decks and is part of a cycle of a bunch of creatures that were introduced in the precons that have soulbound. What soulbound means is that when you play a creature, um, pretty much it can be paired with Doomweaver. So when Doomweaver or another creature enters the battlefield, you can choose to bond them together. Doomweaver is a 6 to cast 1/8. So it's got a big butt. It can block really well. And it's reach, so it can block flyers. Now, as long as Doomweaver is paired with another creature, each of those creatures, which means Doomweaver itself and whatever it's paired with, has, when this creature dies, draw cards equal to its power. Remember how I said black has a great way of recurring creatures and that they keep dying and coming back? You can keep drawing basically equal to your power because every time a new creature comes in, you can pair it with Doomweaver. 6 to cast is kind of expensive, to be honest. It's not going to be the fastest way to run any combo, but I think that you can assemble something here with Doomweaver that will really get you to draw your entire library. So I'm not sure if any other players are really seeing this, but I am brewing things in my head for this spider horror that I didn't even think I'd be interested in, but I'm willing to give it a shot if I can get a copy of this card. So that pretty much closes the black cards. We're going to move on to, oh wait, no, there is one last black card that I wanted to feature here. This is the flip card. Yep. So this one here is um Henrika Domnathi. Okay, so for the cast 1/3 Flying Vampire. This one is pretty much sort of a reimagining of one of the cards that came out in Throne of Eldraine. So it is a flying, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to choose one of the following. Each player has to sacrifice a creature, you draw a card and lose a life, or you get to transform Henrika. So basically, um, it depends on the order that you'd like to do this. I really would suggest, of course, using the first two modes before flipping her over. unless you're the only one with a creature left. Once she flips over, she becomes Henrika Infernal Seer, a 3/4 flying death touch lifelink. So she's pretty much just a bigger version of a vampire Nighthawk, and then has an ability of 1 black black. Each creature you control with flying, death touch, and or lifelink gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So she kind of has a little bit of an anthem effect attached to her, but it's kind of expensive to be honest. Um, I think that it's a viable option, but I think using just the first or the front face here of having everyone sacrifice a creature or even just drawing and losing a life, and then just finding a way to like maybe flip the creature or sorry, I mean flicker, so you get the effect over again, is something that I would rather do. So maybe not the Infernal Seer side. It's not that great. Right. So we move on now to red. So as we move into the red cards, let me just do a quick scan here. Yeah, okay. Red, there are a few options that we're going to go through as well. So the very first one is Vampire's Vengeance. This one is just a quick study here. It is a 3 to cast instant. Vampire's Vengeance deals 2 damage to each non-vampire creature. So that actually exists in so many different forms. There was a previous version that was 2 damage to each non-pirate. There is also Whip Flame that 2 damage to each non-artifact. So there's a lot of versions of this same effect just for vampires. Okay, but you get a blood token. So that is the one that takes it one step further than any of the other spells that has the same effect. Just having that blood token and the possibility of discarding to draw a new card makes this one just a touch better than the others. And if you just so happen to be running vampires, then it's a one-sided deal. Why not, right? So Vampire's Vengeance makes it on the list. Reckless Impulse. So this is what I mentioned earlier for abilities that let you play outside of your hand. So Reckless Impulse is a 2 to cast sorcery. Exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. So you get a full cycle. You are allowed to play those cards. Not bad. I mean, it's sorcery speed, but you know what? There have been worse versions of this. I would rather maybe go with the instant version that came out in Midnight Hunt. So this is just maybe a slower, crappier copy that you might want to consider. All right, so we move on to the next card. This one is something that I personally chose and thought that would be really, really good for the list. This is Cemetery Gatekeeper. Cemetery Gatekeeper is a 2 to cast vampire with first strike. Obviously, this is mythic, which means that it has some pretty good abilities that would be tagged onto it. When Gatekeeper enters the battlefield, exile a card from a graveyard. So you can target any graveyard, even your opponent's. And pretty much whenever a player plays a land or casts a spell, if it shares a card type with the exiled card, Gatekeeper deals 2 damage to that player. So this also does affect you, but if your opponents are like a creature based deck, or let's say an instant or sorcery based deck, or just pure artifact, you can technically target them with a lot of damage with this. So that is something that I think would be pretty useful in a competitive setting. So 2 to cast 2/1, it might die pretty quick, but there's a lot of these little pain effects that do exist in red, and just one more option for people to look into, I think is worth making it into the list. Right. So we move on to the next one. This one is Change of Fortune. When I initially saw this card, I thought that it's pretty much a personal wheel of fortune. And then I read the card really carefully. So I would like to maybe discuss this with everyone that is watching and who are familiar with the effects of like wheels. So this is a 4 to cast with only 1 red, which is not bad. Discard your hand, then draw a card for each card you've discarded this turn. So if you throw away 4 cards, you get 4 cards, right? That's how I first read it. Now, let me do it one more time. Discard your hand, then draw a card for each card you've discarded this turn. So you could actually be maybe running multiple wheel effects. Like prior to Hull Breacher being banned, or even when you have like Karkashima or just Kark, the thumbless in play. When you run this spell, you will pretty much be able, you are going to count how many cards you've discarded for the whole turn, not just the discard your hand part. So if you're doing a lot of manipulation of your hand, you could recuperate so much with this. It's a little iffy and the cost may not be worth it, but when I read this and just had that epiphany of what you could do with it, I wanted to feature this because I am going to try to break this. This is going into red blue so bad. Any discard effects that you can accumulate throughout an entire turn, you draw discard, and just like even with the blood tokens, it's counting every instance, and then you get to draw that much back. There is a way to break this, and I'm going to find it. And adding on to it, actually, the next card is just another wheel effect as well. This is Into the Night. It costs 4 as well. It's a sorcery, so again, wheels being instant speed is really busted, so I totally get that. But it becomes night, so it introduces the whole day and night mechanic, which may not be important. What's better is that discard any number of cards, then draw that many plus 1. So you get to filter your hand, and then Into the Night replaces itself with one more card. So there are 2 new wheel effects introduced into the set that I think have so much potential that I want both in foil if possible. Next is another surprise card. People have been looking at this. It's a mythic. It gets all of the attention that a mythic typically would. It is Maniform Kite. It is a 4 to cast 4/4 dragon that flies. Fair enough. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get an XX red dragon illusion with flying and haste. And X is amount to the mana spent for that spell itself. And then exile that token at the beginning of your next end step. So you don't get to keep the dragon. Okay, but if you put this together with any deck that actually cares about creatures dying, if I play a 0 to cast artifact, I will get a 0/0 red dragon, which dies immediately. But if I'm doing it just to get the death trigger, this guy can actually make you so many dead tokens that you could pull off again another infinite loop with this guy. You just have to be playing non-creature spells. So going back to blue, how earlier we were looking at the new version of Tidespout Tyrant. When you start looping your spells, you keep getting illusions here that will obviously die. So you can turn that into some kind of sacrificial loop in a way. Or you know what, if you're playing really big spells like extra turn spells, you let's say time warp costs 5, take an extra turn, but it also gives you a 5/5 dragon. You might be able to actually even take out a player with this. So I know that that's what they initially intended for this card, but I'm actually looking to play 0 to cast spells with this because I intentionally want the dragon illusions to die. So I'm looking at it at a totally different perspective and think that there's potential here that players may not be seeing. I think even in a Timna build that you just want to get damage into players so that you can draw cards, why not? Maniform Hellkite is a flyer and then it makes more flyers? Sure. Next one is pretty much the only planeswalker from this new set that I would play. This is Chandra Dressed to Kill. So they brought Chandra into the set. I'm not particularly fond of this artwork specifically. I do like the other versions that they've put out. I believe there is the borderless, yeah, the borderless version, or even the showcase version, which looks so much better. But Chandra here is a 3 to cast, 3 loyalty planeswalker. Her +1 ability is add 1 red and then she deals 1 damage to up to 1 player or planeswalker. So it's just a ping, which is okay, but you get 1 red mana. Or another +1. Exile the top card of your library. If it's red, you may cast it this turn. With a little bit of library manipulation, you could probably get free spells out of this or even thin out your library. But the important one is if you actually get her to 7. Exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may cast red spells from among them this turn. And then you get an emblem. The emblem says when you cast a red spell, it deals X damage to any target where X is the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. So you pretty much become a shooter. With that emblem, you can start dealing damage to anything you want as long as you're casting red. It does kind of pigeonhole you into playing just like maybe mono red. So this is a good addition maybe to mono red decks. It produces mana. It pings some creatures or pings players or planeswalkers. So it has a little bit of control. The exile part is also interesting. I think that there is a way to make this efficient. It's not broken in any sense. And then at 3 loyalty, it's actually pretty easy to kill. Its defense is barely there at all with the 1 damage. It doesn't touch creatures at all. So it can't even really defend itself. But this being able to exile the top of your library, or even just getting a free mana and a ping, if unchecked, this could be a pretty useful tool. Right, so final one for red here is again from the pre-con decks that I just wanted to show. This is the other soulbound. This is for red. This is Mirage Phalanx. So when it comes into play, you can pair it with another creature, or if a new creature comes into play, you can pair it. As long as Mirage Phalanx is paired with another creature, each of those creatures has, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of this creature, except it has haste and loses soulbound. So you can pretty much use this to create a copy of Mirage Phalanx and another creature that it's paired with. That's 2 tokens every turn. And if you get ETB abilities from the second one that you're copying, you pretty much have a way of almost repeating this whole process if you wanted to. There's a way to break this, and you get a 4/4 haste and whatever creature you're pairing it with. I think that there is a way that you might even be able to pull off infinite combat with this, because if you choose, let's say, Combat Celebrant, you'll get a copy of Combat Celebrant. You can exert the copy, which gives you a new combat step. And then pretty much you're going to get another copy of Mirage Phalanx and Combat Celebrant, and pretty much you go infinite. It's 6 to cast, which is kind of expensive again. All of the soulbound creatures from the commander set now is all 6 to cast. They're quite expensive. So don't consider this as a highly competitive combo, but it is something that can be fitted in if you wanted to. All right, we move on to the last colors before we go to multi. I only really have a few options here for green. So first one is Cemetery Prowler. I like this because it plays into some fundamental abilities that I am more fond of. I'm not really a green player, but I wanted to bring this up because it's a 3 to cast 3/4 Vigilance. Not bad. I mean, for paying 3, it's bigger than 3. And then it doesn't even tap to attack. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, exile a card from a graveyard. So again, graveyard hate on a wolf, not bad. Then spells you cast cost 1 less for each card type that shares with the card's exiled. So every turn, when it comes in and when it attacks, just keep taking cards out, and pretty much it can discount every card type for you by at least 1. So green already has like a flooding of mana that it doesn't need help with, but this thing is just a living discount. So why not run it, right? So it makes it into my list. I'd run it. If I could get a copy of it, it's a mythic. I'm pretty sure everyone wants one. Next one is Cultivator Colossus, another mythic. This one is 7 to cast. When this was spoiled, people already immediately came up with a combo with this, which is bonkers crazy. So it is a 7 to cast trample, and its power and toughness is equal to the number of lands you control. When Cultivator Colossus enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tap. If you do, draw a card and repeat this process. So, with a card like Abundance that lets you choose land or creature, you can just keep saying land and you will draw every land card from your library and put it into the battlefield tapped. If you're running something like there is that one land that red has that pretty much will be able to shoot players. Valakut, there you go. If you're running Valakut and a bunch of mountains, you could pretty much just flat out win already with Abundance. So this isn't even legendary, so it's definitely going to be part of the creatures in your deck. Red has ways of sneaking this thing in and just have Abundance in play. You have a machine gun basically. Um, Again, when it was spoiled, people already got excited for this. Green loves big things. This thing is huge, plant beast, and pretty much just it's so much ramp. It breaks the one land per turn rule so fast, and even just comes with a free draw. Why not, right? And it's trample. You put out all 30 lands that you have, or 35, or whatever, how many lands you're running. This thing becomes a beast. You just have to keep it alive, protect it somehow, and you're good to go. Next one is, this one's interesting. It's a reimagining of a card called Elvish Piper. Hey, wait, before we step in, hey, Jake, thank you for joining. Yes, Crimson Vow. For the trailer, yes, I did like the trailer. Again, really good job with the animation from Wizards of the Coast. Pretty much the last time I did see a trailer that I thought was very interesting was back in War of the Spark. So it's nice that they are kind of doing it again. So going back to the card, Hullbreaker Piper here is a reimagining of a older card called Elvish Piper. Elvish Piper was a 4 to cast 1/1 elf. This time is a 4 to cast 2/2 human werewolf, so it's already better. It cannot be countered. Much better. And then you pay 2 and put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Elvish Piper was you pay, I think it was you pay 4. So this is already better as well. But it says only activate as a sorcery. So that's where the problem comes in. If it was a wolf or a werewolf, you get to untap Hullbreaker Piper. With this ability, I don't think you're going to really be running this for werewolves or wolves. So it does have the night-bound and day-bound sequence here. So once it flips over to night, it becomes Wild Song Howler. When this enters the battlefield or transforms, look at the top 6 card of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them, put it into your hand. So pretty much it can also dig up creatures so that when it becomes a Piper again, you can cheat in the creature that you dig for. So this requires a little bit of flipping action, but you can definitely get free creatures here. It has no restriction to color. It just says put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. It doesn't even care what kind of creature it is. It just has a whole bonus for being a wolf or werewolf. But again, any way to get something for free, you have my attention. This is going to break games. Just watch out for it. Get your biggest Eldrazi and just pop it into the game. Green has so many ways of tutoring creatures to the top of its player's library. Why not? Let's take a step back. How about a Cultivator Colossus? Just slip it into the top 6 and then cheat it in. There's so much that you can do with this. So I think Hullbreaker Piper is another good pick. Next one is last one for green. This one is Abbabrook Caretaker. This one is I don't know, contentious because of its casting cost, but I think that it still is something that should be considered. It is a 6 to cast 4 for a human werewolf. It is hexproof, so no one can touch it, basically. At the beginning of your combat, put 2+1/+1 counters on another target creature you control. So it cannot target itself, but it makes other creatures bigger. When it flips over, it becomes the Howlhenge Hunt Master. It is a werewolf with hexproof. Other permanents you control have hexproof. At the beginning of your combat, put 2+1/+1 counters on each creature you control, including itself. So it gets bigger and bigger, and then it is full blown protection from your entire board state. So the front half of it doesn't look that good, but all of a sudden it becomes a beast. Hexproof, all other permanents have hexproof, is amazing protection, and then it just gives everything you have +2/+2 permanently because these are counters. So even when it flips back to the caretaker, it keeps those tokens. So this one I wanted to add in. It's contentious because of being 6 to cast, but it's a mythic. They always make mythics big, so why not? I would run this if I was playing green. So that's pretty much it for the 5 colors. Now we're going to be running down the multicolor list. This one's going to be a little faster, mainly because some of these cards are just like weaker versions again of existing cards. So let's get started with the first one here. This is Olivia Crimson Bride. This is pretty much the namesake of the set. The Crimson Vow Wedding is with Olivia Voldaren and then also with Edgar Markov. So she is pretty much main character of the storyline. Olivia is a 6 to cast 3/4. So she's already weaker than her casting cost, but she's flying in haste, which means that she can attack immediately. When Olivia Crimson Bride attacks, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. So pretty much it just brings in any dead creature from your graveyard in for free. That is absolutely busted in the right circumstances. And then, when you don't control a legendary vampire, exile this creature. So you could potentially lose these creatures forever. But you know what? Olivia is a legendary vampire. If you can keep her protected, if you can put on like some kind of lightning greaves, swiftfoot boots on her and just protect her, make her indestructible, you can pretty much keep getting every creature from your graveyard back in at just free. She just has to attack. So I see a lot of potential here that she wasn't in the Commander Precon, but you should be running her there. You know how many massive vampires that cost like 7 or 8 and can just break games? She brings them in for free by just simply attacking. Right. Next one is this is eruth. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Tormented Prophet. 3 to cast 2/4 for red blue. Not bad because the exchange for red blue has always been like they're just like squishy and easy to kill. This one's not bad. 3 to cast 2/4 is a good trade-off. It's a human wizard, and if you would draw a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library instead, and you may play those cards this turn. Basically, you get to double your draw, but it runs the risk of you losing the cards. I would, I still would consider this. This is more of a personal flavor for me that you can pretty much double up your cards, but you have to use them immediately. If you're running a lot of like mana producing builds like Bergie, or even if you are running, let's say, something like Joyra Weatherlight Captain, every draw trigger exiles, you get twice as much. You can actually pull off your combo twice as fast as long as you don't really have to pay for the spells anymore. So I would run this. It's a little high risk, and you really have to build your decks a certain way for it. So I added this here as more of a personal pick because again, this is my list and my recommendation. So I see a lot. I wouldn't run her as a commander at all. There is no possible way that I would ever use this as a commander. But it's, I think, something that I would fit into any red blue deck that I have, or even red blue black or a red blue white, as long as you have access to a lot of cheap spells. Every draw that she does will give you pretty much 2 cards, and you can filter out the lands and stuff you don't need anymore. So I see good things happening with this creature in my 99. Next one is another, I would say, frustration of mine, which is Orsolver Black White. This is the Markov Purifier. It is a 3 to cast 2/3 lifelink. Not bad. Vampire Cleric. Not bad too. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, you may pay 2. And if you do, draw a card. White needs help to draw cards. This is a good addition. You just need to be building black and white, I suppose, but I'd build it. You don't even need this particular creature to attack as long as you just gained life for any reason. Pay two and draw a card. It's a great way of just building up your hand back to where you need it to be. And a three to cast 2/3 isn't that bad. So uncommon level, something I just felt like adding in there. Next is Strefan, Progenitor. So this one here is the face of the black-red pre-constructed vampire deck that I think is actually really decent because he is a 4 to cast 3/2 flyer. Not that good in terms of his stats, but at the beginning of your end step, create a blood token for each opponent who lost life this turn. Black and red is so close. It's the aristocrat build that just pings little life off people. So you might be making maybe 1 or 2 blood tokens per turn out of this. When Strefan attacks, you may sacrifice 2 blood tokens. And if you do, you may put a vampire from your hand into the battlefield tapped and attacking. And then it gets indestructible, which means that it's not even going to die. So this in Olivia, one brings any creature from the grave back in. This one can bring any vampire from your hand back in. There's so many ways to break this. Just maybe throw in a little bit of changeling and you can just bring in the biggest changelings you have. It's actually a pretty decent, I would say, pre-constructed commander, because typically the face commanders for pre-constructed decks have always been underwhelming. So this is a step towards the right direction. I think that maybe he should have been a 3/3 flyer, in my opinion. Giving him this 2 toughness, it doesn't make him a threat, to be honest. They should have made him bigger. And just to prove that point, we move to the next one, which is the face commander of the other commander deck, blue and white. This is Millicent, Restless Revenant. 7 to cast 4/4 flyer, but cost 1 less for each spirit you control. And when Millicent, Revenant, a Restless Revenant, or another non-token spirit you control dies or deals combat damage to a player, so there's death and combat damage trigger, it creates 1/1 white spirits, which basically, if Millicent dies, the tokens it made discount its cost and you can bring it back in. Basically, you can almost build a weird sacrificial loop with this as long as you just keep producing spirits. I think that if there was ever going to be a spirit tribal commander, this is as good as it's going to get. So I added it onto this list because I see so much potential for it. And now we move on to the final card. The final card for tonight is, again, it's a little tough to explain, but I'll walk everyone through it as best as I can. This one is a black-blue vampire, which I never thought that they would make one, but I think that they have in the past, but it just doesn't fit the set because everything that you've been looking at for vampires have been black or red. This is Runo Stormkirk. He is a 3 to cast, black-blue vampire, and he's also a cleric. Most clerics are white. Why is it a black cleric? But so be it. He is a 1/4 flyer. When he enters the battlefield, put up to 1 creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. So, okay, he can go pick up something that you've lost earlier in the game. Not bad. Then, at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If it is a creature with mana value 6 or greater, you will transform Runo, and he becomes Crothus, Lord of the Deep. Crothus is a 3/5 legendary Kraken horror. So we have a vampire cleric that's black and blue that becomes a Kraken horror. I don't know how they added everything up and got up to this point, but I'll give it to Wizards. They really love pushing the envelope and making the weirdest things ever. So Crothus pretty much has the following abilities. When he attacks, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of another target attacking creature. So you want another creature attacking with Crothus so that you can get a copy of it. So basically you'll have 3 attackers, so to speak. Now, if that creature happens to be a kraken, leviathan, octopus, or serpent, you get actually double the tokens, so you become 4 attackers. And krakens, leviathans, octopus, and serpents tend to really be big creatures. So the first half here of having something with mana value 6 or greater it can happen pretty quick if you are running this whole sea creature tribal thing. It's a really off the wall build, but the fact that you can get multiple copies of some of the biggest creatures in Magic, and this is a 3/5, which means that even flying, so it has evasion, it can probably swing through and survive. But put in some of the biggest creatures Magic has ever seen, which are in blue. Even Garuda, the legendary companion that came out in Ikoria, getting 2 copies of it. So sure, they're gonna die, but you get all of the animation triggers from them. You could build a pretty busted deck with this that has a little bit of a slow setup because you need to get Runo in. You need to start your turn by showing something 6 or greater, and then he'll flip, and then you need to have one of those things already in play. So couple of hoops to jump into, and just to make this happen, you may not even win flat out, but in a casual setting, I think that this is going to be really fun for other people to play. I didn't necessarily want to include this, to be honest. I kind of find it just really fiddly, but where else are you going to see a blue vampire that becomes a kraken horror? And this sense this does not make, and it deserves to be on the list just because of just the pure creativity that went into this stupid card. Um, I think that it has potential, sure. So maybe I'll stop my list at 33 and just say that this is an honorable mention. There are still a couple of other things that were in the set that are maybe specifically just like zombie tribal that weren't that great. So, like I did show one earlier that produces 1 zombie at a time. So, there is that. And that pretty much brings our list to a close. I hope that you enjoyed the cards that were featured here. Crimson Vow has been released. It is available for purchase in your LGS or anywhere that you get your Magic products from. I think there might be a little bit of a delay in some of the versions of it. Maybe the collector boosters again. It's really typical in these times. So I think just a little bit of patience might go a long way for that. Um, I hope everyone enjoyed today's video. If you have comments or suggestions as to what you'd like for me to cover on the next episode, please let me know. And with that, my name is Javi. Thank you so much for joining me for Sunday Night Magic. You all have a great day. Keep safe, keep gaming.